So I'd just like to say hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first Don't Bank on the Bomb UK Network meeting. My name is Zara Kapasi, and I am the project coordinator for Don't Bank on the Bomb UK. I just want to start by saying thank you all for being here today. It's so great to see so many of you joining to learn more about ethical finance and how we can take action together. So before we begin, as Sarah put in the chat, I'd just like to make a quick note that the event is being recorded. The recording will only spotlight whoever is speaking, but nevertheless, feel free to keep your cameras off if you would like to not be recorded, because I believe we will be sharing this afterwards. I'd also like to say that we encourage you to ask questions and share your thoughts, so please feel free to leave those in the chat. And after our guest speakers have finished, we'll open up the mic for access to speak, during the Q&A sessions. So today we'll start by introducing there we go. Today we'll start by introducing the Don't Bank on the Bomb UK campaign. We're then very lucky to have two expert guest speakers with us, Susi Snyder from ICAN and Steve Hucklesby from the Joint Public Issues team, who will share insights on ethical finance, divestment, and disarmament. After the presentations and Q&A, we'll break into smaller groups to discuss and share ideas on how we can strengthen the campaign and advance divestment efforts. Finally, we'll come back together to explore ways to get involved and take action before wrapping up, and we'll hopefully be done by 8 o'clock. So again, I would like to emphasize that we're really keen for this to be an open discussion. We want to hear from you, learn from your experiences, and work together to build a stronger movement. So we're hoping that this meeting is a chance to connect, share ideas, and plan meaningful action. And on that note, let's get started. So at its core, Don't Bank on the Bomb UK is about challenging the financial sector's role in nuclear weapons production. So as has been shown in the recently released PAX and ICAN report, which I will be sharing in the chat a bit later, many banks, pension funds, and financial institutions invest in and profit from companies that manufacture these weapons, which makes the threat of nuclear war even more real. So our goal is to expose and challenge this funding. We're demanding these financial institutions move their money away from companies that manufacture and trade in these weapons of mass destruction. And we're inviting you to join us as we build a nationwide campaign movement, applying pressure to ensure these institutions withdraw their support for the nuclear weapons industry. As such, we're creating a toolkit, the launch for which will be held next month, to empower individuals, communities, and organizations to campaign for divestment from nuclear weapons and reinforce that funding mass destruction is both morally and socially unacceptable. I'll also be sharing the link to the toolkit in the chat, so please do register and join us in our call for a safer and more equitable world. So on that note, I would now like to introduce our first guest speaker, Susi Snyder. Susi is the program coordinator at the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN. Her responsibilities include facilitating the development and execution of ICAN's key programs, including the management of ICAN's divestment work and engagement with the financial sector. Prior to this, Susi coordinated the Don't Bank on the Bomb project for over a decade, and she is an expert on nuclear weapons with experience at the intersect between nuclear weapons and human rights. Thank you so much, Susi.
Thank you so much. It is excellent to be here. I'm going to share a little bit. Let's see if I can make this look as lovely as I hope it does. There we go. It is fantastic to join you all here today. So excited by the fact that Medact has taken up the call to work on this issue and to really kind of engage in the divestment effort. And it's not the start of this effort, because I know that you all and the physicians around the world have been very active in this issue for quite some time. And I think that's really great. And we see it in the different impacts that you have had. And this is the kind of issue where it may not feel like the impact is happening right away. Sometimes the wins take a while. That's the whole thing with nuclear weapons. We talk about nuclear weapons and they are terrifying and they make us nervous and we want to do something and we think that we're doing the right things and we just wait and hope that we are. And because we are still here, we have successfully prevented nuclear war, right? So we know we are doing good things. And even so, I want to just remind everybody, even if it doesn't feel like it, and it feels like everything is coming to an end and that the risks are higher than they've ever been, we are on the right track. It's the last gasps of an industry that fears for its survival. And we are putting an end to that industry. And that's one of the things I want to talk about. So, I mean, I'll talk about don't bank the bomb, but I really want to talk about one of the ways that we're working to reduce the risks of nuclear weapons and to reduce the role of nuclear weapons in our world. And to, in some ways, make it clear to everybody who actually is behind the scam of nuclear deterrence. Because it's a scam that's been played on us. And we're pulling it apart, we're unveiling it. And by showing the money trail, it's one of the ways in which we're doing it. And it takes time. Like I said, it takes time. But we know because we look at empirical evidence, we know we are having an impact. I thank you, because it's not me alone at all. This is a collection of many people's work that has brought us to the impact that we're having. And the plan is fairly simple. We increase the cost of doing business with the nuclear industry, and that gets investors to stop investing, and that leads to a change in the industry itself. They will never give us credit for changing the industry, except sometimes it sort of slips out, and they do. Like Serco. Now, there are a lot of factors that led to Serco dropping out of the UK kind of nuclear weapons establishment. But one that was reported on was the fact that as long as they had contracts for Aldermaston, as long as they had those contracts, they were being excluded from the investment universe of those who followed environmental, social, and governance practices. So Serco will never say, oh, you guys and your pressure in the financial industry, you're the ones who made us change our story. But we know that we're having an impact. And it was reported in the press. This does slip out. And it's important that it does, because we need to remind ourselves we are on the right path. But let's talk about those companies for a minute. I think it's really important to look at who we mean when we talk about the nuclear weapons industry. With Don't Bank on the Bomb, we look at major nuclear weapon contractors. So these are companies whose involvement is related to warheads or to specifically designed nuclear capable delivery systems like missiles. It does include some dual use military and civilian technology, but it excludes technology that is not specifically designed for nuclear weapons. These companies, these are not the companies making the screws or the bolts. These are not the companies that are making the tin around the warheads. Not per se. These are the companies that they are making the key components that facilitate the lethality of nuclear weapons. And to be honest, when we dig into it and we dig into who are significant, so who have contracts that are worth in multi-millions or have multi-year contracts, when we look at who are touting, who are celebrating their work and their connection to the nuclear weapon industry, those are the ones we identify as significant. And some of them have very large contracts. So this is it, but it's not that many companies altogether. Most of the companies that we find involved in the nuclear weapons industries are US-based companies. And that's because the United States has this practice of contracting most of its activities outside of government. So the United States spends half of all of the world's spending on nuclear weapons, right? Not because they have half of the weapons, but because they hire private contractors who, as we know, have a long history of inflationary cost, have a fantastic history of delivering late and over budget. In fact, I look at the contracts and it is amazing how often a contract will be agreed, say, for a retrofit of a Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile contract with Lockheed Martin. It'll be agreed for a certain amount, and 3 days later, there'll be a publication of a contract modification that triples the value of that contract. It's part of the scam of nuclear deterrence. It's part of this concept that these weapons are so great that they have to be had. And it's something that we need to unveil. One of the companies I want to single out is Northrop Grumman. Northrop Grumman, because they are involved in both the US and UK nuclear weapon programs, they work on Trident. And they have over $31 billion. I should have converted it to pounds. I'm sorry, I didn't think about it. They have over $31 billion in outstanding contracts for this work. And those missiles that they're building are designed to deliver cascading, cumulative, complex catastrophe anywhere in the world in a half an hour or less. They're continuously at sea. Northrop Grumman does this, and the way that they are contracted, including for the UK missiles, is convoluted. It's complicated. It's hard to pick apart because the UK government does not contract Northrop Grumman directly. The UK government contracts the US to contract Northrop Grumman on its behalf. So this pads the bill for the UK government. This pads the bill for the UK taxpayer. This is highly problematic behavior. And in a country that is made announcements today that would be cutting foreign aid in order to increase defense spending, this is hugely problematic. The UK cannot afford nuclear weapons if it plans to have any sort of defense. It's either they're dumb. They can't have it. But overall, there's only a couple of dozen companies that have this kind of significant contracts. And you'll find details about this in the report that Zara just mentioned, the latest Don't Bang on the Bomb report. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So this report came out a week ago today, which it feels like it was a year because so much has happened in that week. It's been incredible. But just a week ago today, we were able to launch the most recent Don't Bank on the Bomb report. It's called At Great Cost, the companies building nuclear weapons and their financiers. And this report shows there are 260 financial institutions. And those are, a financial institution, it's a weird phrase, right? So it's an asset manager, somebody who figures out where your pension should be invested, or it's the pension fund, or it's your bank, or it's these companies or it's your insurance company. All of these are institutional investors. All of these are kind of within the universe of financial institutions. And this report lists 260 of them that have significant investment or financing relationships with the nuclear weapons industry. So there's two types of figures that we outline in this report. One is the shareholding and bond holding. Those are investments, right? So you buy a piece of a company. I'm going to go buy a piece of Lockheed Martin. And because I own a piece of Lockheed Martin, every time Lockheed Martin declares a profit, I get a little cut of the profit. Every time Lockheed Martin inflates their share price by doing share buybacks, I get a little bit of imaginary money because my share value goes up. I don't actually get the money until I sell the shares, but I can imagine that I have this great investment and this great bit of money. It's imaginary until you sell it. And if everybody sells it at the same time, then its value is very low. Or if, for example, the Norwegian government pension fund decides to exclude the company, the share price tends to drop really fast. And the Norwegian government pension fund has last year alone, excluded 2 more companies for their involvement in nuclear weapons production. They excluded Huntington Ingalls Industries and L3 Harris. Their shares went down. It's the biggest pension fund in the world. You don't want to piss off the Norwegian oil money. It's bad for business. When they dropped Boeing shares, when they dropped Boeing and said Boeing is involved in nuclear weapons production, Boeing share prices dropped 2% the next day. A lot of money. It's powerful. when these institutional investors say, hey, we're not going to do this anymore. It shakes up the market. And it's having a big impact. And I'll get to that in a second. But this report talks about the shareholding, the bond holding. So when you hold a little piece of a company, the shares, or a little piece of that company's debt, the bonds. It also talks about crediting relationships, so loans that are given. Loans are very rarely given. It's not like HSBC says, hello, I'm going to loan $50 million to RTX. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm making up this funny voice, but I am. Because that's how I picture HSBC decision makers like sitting in a chair going, yes, stroking their imaginary beards. But it's not HSBC alone that will do this. They'll get in a conglomerate and they'll go in on the loan together. And it's usually like 20, 23, 26 people, 26 institutions that'll get in on this loan together, and they can be very big institutions because they want to share the risk. Nobody wants to get in that kind of relationship alone, especially not with a company like RTX. That's what it's what Raytheon's called now. And they're currently paying a bunch of fines in the US because of bribery and corruption charges. Like, they're not a good investment. They're not sound. Like, it's just bad business. But Don't Bank on the Bomb gets into this question. Who is giving this credit? Who's underwriting? Who's saying, oh, you want to sell bonds, tiny pieces of debt? Somebody has to back that up so that the bondholder, like, could be me, I don't lose my money on the bond. I'm supposed to get interest. I buy it for like 10 years and then I get a little piece every year. And then at the end of the 10 years, it's done. And I get my original investment plus like a 2 to 6 to 10% return. The bank guarantees that. That's called underwriting. And we also talk about underwriting in this report. You probably all already know this. I apologize if I'm giving you info you already have. But just to be on the safe side, it's good to kind of go into some of the basics. This report, Don't Bank on the Bomb, it talks about these financial institutions, the types of financing relationships that they have with the nuclear weapons industry, and then it talks about the industry itself. So it outlines what are the 24 top nuclear weapon producing companies doing? Like, what are they making and for who? How much money are they getting to make that stuff? And who's investing in them and trying to make a profit off of them? Because every investment is an attempt to make a profit. And that's what we have to remember when whoever we're talking to about their investment policies, their practices. Investment, the goal of investment is to get a return. It's to get a profit. So it's important for us to keep thinking about that and to use it within our conversations about nuclear weapons. With the last thing I want to tell you about the Don't Bank on the Bomb report is a piece of good news. And then I'll wrap up because Steve's going to talk and I'm excited to hear what he has to say. But the piece of good news is that, yeah, we talk about 260 financial institutions that have relationships. But this is more than 20% fewer institutions than before the nuclear ban treaty went into effect. That's a lot. 20% is a big jump. If somebody takes 20% of the cash in my wallet, like, I'm going to feel it, right? 20% is not a little bit. So we've had this jump and this drop off of investors. And we ask them why, right? Why are they leaving this industry? Some of them because they have done an analysis of the companies and figured bribery, corruption, fraud, like under investigation, bad governance, workers being killed, strikes, bad investment, risky business. But some of them have said the reason that they're out is because of the changing environment around nuclear weapons. And because they don't want to be exposed to a company that is producing something that is prohibited under international law, even if they're not in a country that subscribes to that international law. And we also campaign. So, we've pushed a lot of effort and put a lot of energy into getting institutions to say that they won't invest in the nuclear weapons industry. And over the last years, we have now more than 130 institutions that have either put a public statement, changed their investment policy, or joined onto a sign-on letter or the Nuclear Weapons Free Finance Initiative, which is one of our projects, where they said they will not, because they have expressed their support for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and they will not profit from the nuclear weapons industry. And that's great. That's 130 financial institutions. 130 may not sound like that much, but it's $4.8 trillion in assets under management. And you can't count to $1 trillion in 30 years, right? Trillion is bonkers numbers. So we're really happy to see these institutions stepping away, and we keep encouraging others and all institutional investors to join into this initiative. And with this, I'll just say one more thing. There are a lot of institutional investors. There's the big ones. There's your HSBC, there's your Barclays. But there's also your local institutions. There's your church pension fund. There's your firefighters association. There's your city and your municipality. So there's a lot of places that can do good and can help shift the tide, because that's what we're doing, and we're doing it together. And I'm glad that you're all here today or listening later to be a part of this, because nobody does it alone. And I'm confident we're going to see the end of the nuclear weapons era in our time. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Susie, and thank you for sharing such a comprehensive overview of the campaign and divestment as a whole. It's nice to hear that it works. It's nice to hear that there has been such a huge drop-off. 20%, like you mentioned, is a massive number, and breaking down the scam, as you refer to it, and I 100% agree it's a scam, really does help with achieving those numbers. So thank you so much, and I hope we can continue making such progress and get that percent going up and up every year, and with every report that launches. So thank you so much. So next up we have Steve Hucklesby. Steve is a policy advisor on international affairs for the Joint Public Issues Team, JPIT, where he supports the Baptist Union of Great Britain, the Methodist Church, and the United Reformed Church in dialogue with the UK government and Parliament around foreign and defence policy and response to the climate crisis. Steve also acts as an advisor to the Joint Advisory Committee for the Ethics of Investment of the Methodist Church in Britain. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you very much. It's really exciting to be with you at the start of the launch of this new project. Also to be sharing this with Susi, whose work over the last 10 years has been so important to our work as well. I'm going to try and share my screen. Let's see if this works. Are you seeing that? Great. We've mentioned already the shocking news today that UK defence spending is going to be increased by cutting down aid spending. That's against a pledge made in Labour's manifesto. The fact the government can make these sort of changes just shows for me that there's something missing in our narrative in the UK around nuclear weapons. They are indiscriminate. What I'm going to do is share with you a project we've been running since 2017, which is now coming to conclusion. It's the Investing in Change project, which is researched into the policies of 15 banks and pension funds in some detail, and then engaged in writing with those companies. And there have been 11 partners involved in this project. They are faith-based partners. They are Christian CND, Don't Bank on the Bomb Scotland, the Baptist Union, Quakers in Britain, Pax Christi, Soccer Gakkai International, the Joint Public Issues Team, and others. They're not all faith-based partners, but many of them are. We started this initiative very much aware that the campaign needed to have a broader membership. And so I think that this platform that Medact are providing will be able to provide that. But there were some lessons I think that I've learned through the work that we've done, engaging with supporters and engaging with banks and pension funds, which I'll just outline for you here now. Let me start off by just describing very quickly the project that we've undertaken, the work that we've undertaken. It was quite an exciting project, and I've learned a good bit through it. We've worked at the beginning for a year researching UK banks and pension funds, looking at their policies and looking also at their exposure to the funding of nuclear weapons programs. All companies in the survey were contacted and they were invited to respond to our questions while we were researching their positions. The analysis on each company was then fed back to the company for checking prior to the publication of our report. When we engaged initially, the responsiveness of companies was a bit mixed. Only a few wanted to respond to us in much detail. Most were quite cautious and skeptical regarding their engagement. However, that pretty much changed once the report came out and was published and circulated. And the report itself then enabled us to obtain much more significant meetings with banks and pension funds after that. These are the banks and pension funds in the program. One intention of the report was to help our supporters in our organization see how their savings and pension funds were being used. So a key intention was public awareness raising. A further objective was, and Susi has talked about this, to change awareness in the investment community, to let investment management firms know that churches and other faith-based groups, and indeed other civil society groups, were interested in ensuring that their investment management operations were not investing in nuclear weapons. So we're looking to persuade the financial institutions so that there is a customer base that is looking for action in this area. I should mention at this point that the faith-based organizations involved in managing this project already had a good track record in terms of their own investments. Some of them, like the Methodist Church, have quite significant investments, £1 billion under investment with an investment management organization in the City of London that also provides investment services to third parties. And so that we have had to look at this in some detail in terms of our own institutional setup. The team working on this project, Investing in Change, were only a small team. So as I said, it took us a year to do this research. It seemed like a very long time. This is briefly what we discovered. These are the 6 banks in the survey. The survey split into banks on one hand and pension funds on the other. We rated each organization out of 30. They were rated out of 10 for the strength of their policies around nuclear weapons. Then they were rated for a further 10 regarding their practices. We wanted to make sure that their practices were in tune with their policies. In this area, their practices, this is where the work of the ICAN and PACS, Don't Bank on the Bomb, detailed reports by country was really invaluable, so that we could see with each financial institution how much exactly was invested. And then the final measure was around transparency. What level of detail was there on their websites around their investment practice in nuclear weapons? 50% of the mark on transparency also reflected their willingness or otherwise to engage with us in our project. So we developed very detailed metrics for these 3 areas: policy, practice, and transparency. And they were very specific. While you can never be 100% objective in an exercise like this, we tried to set up criteria metrics which were objective as possible. And what we see here immediately, if you look at these figures, is that the Co-op Bank come out well above the others. And this is because they are still the only UK bank in the survey that commits not to invest in nuclear weapons. Triodos, you could say, is in a similar place, but Triodos not in our survey. We saw them as a foreign-owned bank, although they have a separate organisation and company in the UK. So that briefly is the banks, and I'm not going to take time at this stage to go through in any more detail on that. This is some of the scoring from some of the pension funds that was in our survey. So criteria for assessing pension funds had to be slightly different from that of banks. But all of these banks and pension funds had all of these figures fed back to them, and that started some really good conversations. We also invested in a letter writing tool for supporters using an operation called IPAL. It was a little bit expensive and too expensive for us to continue. We offered template letters to people so that they could write to their banks and pension companies just with the click of a button. The letters were tailored to each financial institution. In the template letter, we briefly commended the bank or pension fund with what we could see that might be good in their policies, but what our supporters really wanted is insurance that none of their savings or pensions would be invested in nuclear weapons, and that was made pretty clear in the letter as well, and the supporters could then tailor that letter to their own as they wished. Over the course of the project, 300 letters were written. 170 of them came from one campaign, and that's the campaign of Don't Bank on the Bomb Scotland. And a big shout out here to Michael Orgill and Linda Pearson of Don't Bank on the Bomb Scotland, who did brilliant work back in 2018. Don't Bank on the Bomb Scotland is now known as NatWest. Again, it's rebranded. But the work that they did produced a lot of letters. They also got a piece into the Herald newspaper and did a lot of other public engagement work around that. And that really opened the doors as well for us to have good conversations with the Bank of Scotland. So I think I'm moving on now to the sort of lessons that we've learnt through the project. And I think that's one of the lessons that we learn is that if you can go public on this and really get the bank's name out there and into the press, then that gives you a pretty good response and dialogue with the bank or pension fund. Other lessons that we take, we had a campaign where we did actions around the AGMs of banks and pension funds, and that was quite interesting. The members of pension funds in particular are usually able to raise questions at company AGMs. That could be done either by sending them online or by being there in person yourself. Our project managed targeted AGMs with Twitter memes around the time of the AGM, so that the bank's own staff and the AGM members were suddenly hit with these calls highlighting their exposure to production of nuclear weapons and demanding that be dropped. We used the AGM hashtag if we could, so these were pretty obvious on the Twitter feed for the AGM. And so that's maybe something to think about going forward as well. Another piece of learning coming from this project is that in our engagement with banks and pension funds, we asked them to consult with their members on this issue, particularly effective with pension funds. There's a lot that they could object to in our dialogue, but it was pretty much more difficult to object to consulting with their own members on this policy. So that was taken on by 2 or 3 of them. Nest, for example, did a consultation of their entire membership, and they have a very big membership. Unfortunately, it hasn't changed the policies of Nest yet, but let's keep working on that. Um, a further lesson, and this is one I always have to tell myself, persevere and persevere again. Keep at it. Keep plugging away. Keep working at it. Susi has pointed to the change that is happening, but this change is not happening overnight, and we have to be persistent here. After we produced the report and started engaging with banks, they became more willing to engage in conversation with us. And as a result of this work, we ended up having meetings sometimes at quite high levels with Barclays, with HSBC, Standard Chartered, Royal London, NatWest, and then briefly a short meeting with Standard Life. These meetings can get quite technical. We have to be prepared. We have to be well researched as we come into a meeting. But we also have to be in this for a long haul and to try and change people's minds over time. With regard to banks, the TPNW, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, has been absolutely vital in this engagement. Unfortunately, some banks and pension funds hide behind the fact that the UK government doesn't support the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. However, our argument was that if a bank or pension company has a worldwide business, then we challenge them on the fact that the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is a global instrument. We highlighted its ratification by companies, by countries in which that bank or pension company also had operations. Because banks and pension companies don't want to have one set of policies for the UK and a different set of policies for other parts of the world. Ireland's ratification of the TPNW is particularly useful in this respect, as is Austria's and some others. So just finally, I think from my perspective, an observation on the value of this engagement. Yes, we want to get our savings out of nuclear weapons. That is the focused objective. But for me, there's a wider objective, which is also to challenge the assumption that nuclear weapons are somehow ethically neutral. There's a strong link, and Susi's referred to it already, a link between the finance industry, the defense industry, and the government establishment, including the Ministry of Defense. You have this sort of revolving door of people coming in and out of these institutions. Within the financial establishment, assumptions are made that nuclear weapons in our government's hands are weapons of peace. This assumption begins to crumble if financial institutions are then forced to have conversations with their customers, where that assumption is certainly not very obvious. I believe that change in the finance industry is happening. I also believe that it's a crucial part of a wider picture that when change starts happening in the finance industry, it will start to change the overall narrative around nuclear weapons in political life and in other parts of a society as well. So that's the challenge which I shall leave you with at this point.
Thank you so much, Steve. So investing in change was actually my introduction to divestment. And so always really appreciate hearing from you. And thank you for outlining the UK context to divestment and how we can link that to disarmament goals, and for outlining the financial institutions that we should be drawing attention to. And a lot of lessons there for myself as well, and what we should be considering for Don't Bank on the Bomb UK. So thank you very much. We will now be opening up for questions. So please do drop any questions you may have in the chat or raise your hand and Sarah should be able to give you mic access. But in the meantime, I have seen a question for Susi from Michael in the chat. And Michael asks, can Susi elaborate just a little on how campaigning convinced Norwegian pension fund to divest?
Sure. So this is the tricky bit, especially if you're working in this global situation. Every national pension fund operates differently. Like a lot of these funds, they do have different rules and different ways in which they're governed. In the case of the Norwegian government pension fund, the decisions about how the fund is operated is guided by a council of ethics that has to listen to what the Norwegian parliament says. So we worked with members of parliament and we also met with members of the ethics council, and we made sure to place information, place op-eds, place news stories in Norwegian media, and we made sure that people were taking to social media and protesting the investments that the pension fund continued to have in companies that are associated with the production of nuclear weapons. We got a rules change in the pension funds, in the guidance for the pension funds as directed by Parliament, so that it would have to take a broader consideration of what constituted a nuclear weapon producer. And that led to, not overnight, not in 2 days, not in a week, and over the course of 2 years, it led to the steady exclusion of more and more companies. And they're still not there yet. They are not perfect, but they're getting better, and we actively engage with them using all of these different avenues. And I think Steve really brought this well. There are lots of different ways to talk about this. And so when you project yourself as knowledgeable on the issue by publishing a report, for example, they want to listen. And the Norwegian Government Pension Fund Global will always take their split, right? So they have the Norwegian fund and then the global fund. The global fund is the bigger one. And they'll always take our calls because people say, hey, you're on the bad guys list of Don't Bank on the Bomb. You're not supposed to do that. We're Norwegian. That's wrong. Right. And so it helps to kind of attract a bit of the national identity when and where we can. And I do want to note something. About the power of a few people to affect a change in this, because when I launched my first Don't Bank on the Bomb report, and this is the thing, like you have these little things, and you'll see why I continue to do this. We decided to launch in Sweden. And so we went to Sweden, and we did a roundtable event, and we had the Swedish Red Cross, and it was 2012, and we were like super ambitious. We're going to change the world with this investment report. It's going to be great. And, we had a couple of people talking. The Swedish Red Cross was amazing. We had a front page article in the main daily newspaper in Sweden, national. And they took our info. They asked for the spreadsheets. They made their own graphics. They were much better than our graphics. And that newspaper article, it really cheesed off a handful of Swedes in rural areas who then got on Facebook and started complaining to their bank. And they were like, why is my bank investing? This is a problem. This is not Swedish. Again, we tapped into that identity issue a bit. And they wouldn't stop until finally the bank assigned their ESG officer to contact us and ask, how do we get off your list? We made a problem. We got a policy. That bank is now one of our strong allies. They push others to exclude nuclear weapon producers. And they say, you have to. The reputational risk is too high. The clients get angry and they're persistent, right? Because we're persistent. And, I think that's one of the reasons I keep coming back to this, because sometimes we do get these successes, and it does sometimes just take a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens to make a change. And so, yeah, I'll stop talking. Sorry, but I'm enthusiastic about the possibility, and I hope you share that with me.
Thank you. We have a hand up from Pravina Ellis. Pravina, are you able to unmute?
Yes, I thought I did. Sorry. Is it now? You can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. I must have clicked off and on again. So, I had worked in the NHS, but now I'm in adult education. And I was trying to contact the NHS pension fund to divest. But of course, from what I gather, it doesn't actually have a fund, so they can't divest it. I think it comes straight out of government funds. So Treasury, I don't know exactly where, but there isn't a pot of money or anyone that particularly manages it that you can appeal to. It's same with the state pension, because that's obviously paid by the government.
Thank you, Pravina. Yeah, I think I also have found that it's been quite difficult to track the NHS pension fund. And Michael, is your hand up to add to this point? Yes, okay, then Michael, please do go ahead. And you're muted.
Now you can hear me, I think. Yeah, over the years, and I think Marie Noel just tried to find out again, because in Medact, we always start thinking about the NHS pensions. The NHS pension is ring-fenced in a sense and paid from everyone's taxes from the government. And the government always has said that they don't invest to create those pensions. It's just through taxation. However, local NHS authorities, what used to be called local NHS authorities, their employees often have pensions which may be based on investments. And so that's a possible target. But this makes me think that Susi was very generous talking about Medact in her opening remarks, but we're really trying to create a UK-wide divestment network. And we're just looking at, to use Sarah's favorite phrase, holding the space to help create that. And we want to get lots of individuals and other kinds of campaigning groups involved, from everything from student groups up to elderly groups. And we're just trying to kickstart it. And the next two meetings that Zara is going to coordinate are going to show different ways to do that.
I was muted myself there. Thank you so much, Michael. We have another question in the chat from Emma Sangster. So Emma asks, what do Susi and Steve make of statements over the last couple of years from government ministers about the need for the finance industry to disregard ESG investment criteria for defence companies? It does suggest they have been successful. Susi and Steve, I'll leave it up to you to decide who goes first.
Steve, I'm going to jump in because this has been so massive, but then I want you to follow up because
please do.
I think
I'll follow up.
This has been a coordinated push from the industry. There is a European defense sector lobby, and they have signed the op-eds in Financial Times saying that we have to invest in the defense sector or else the defense sector is going to collapse. This is malarkey. I'm sorry, I won't think of other words, but they're not polite, right? But it is absolutely, it is ridiculous. Investment is designed to give you a profit. And that's what somebody at a bank said to me, reminded me of this. And I was like, how are you dealing? She's like, we only invest to make money. We don't invest to prop up a failing industry. We don't invest to spark a new industry. We were not getting into renewables until we knew that we would make some money off of it. So this call, and it's coming from the top levels, defense ministers across Europe are saying we need money to come into this industry because this industry, doesn't make enough? This is an industry that is doing share buybacks and inflating their own value. It is ridiculous. And I'm sorry that a lot of people are saying, oh no, this is great. This is great. Like these industries are turning record profits. So they don't need investment to sustain themselves. They don't need investment to continue existing. They got it. So thankfully, this is really hard for a lot of our colleagues who have strong positions, particularly around inhumane and indiscriminate weapons. This is really a hard time. And for 3 years, they've been on the hot seat. But they keep coming back to the issue of, yes, we understand the need for self-defense. Yes, we understand the need for a defense industry. No, we will not invest in a company that makes illegal, inhumane, or indiscriminate weapons. They're holding the line. And what we've seen from our analysis is that the number of investors are actually not growing. So I get very worked up because it gets me really agitated because, again, it's like the scam of deterrence. I'm tired of being lied to. I don't want it. That's my take. Steve, however, tends to be much more measured than I am and not nearly so ferocious. So please, Steve.
I'm not more measured at all with you. I'm completely with you on this one. Emma's question sort of highlights the link between government ministers and the finance industry. There's another angle to this, which is a movement which has taken place in the UK over the last 18 months. And this is because the ESG aspects of the investment industry is very much growing at the moment. So more and more finance management institutions being persuaded to apply ESG criteria across all of their investment products. What we've seen, and this is quite frightening, is as a result of the invasion in Ukraine and Ukraine's defense of that and European defense of that, there is an argument within the finance industry in the UK at the moment that defense companies and weapons should themselves be seen as a social good. So weapons companies should not be excluded from ESG based funds. That's not become mainstream at the moment, but it is out there and it is a growing view. And it is one that we're scratching our heads at the moment as we work with Epworth Investment Management and the Central Finance Board of the Methodist Church as to how we can develop a different narrative that just holds the line and says, no, weapons are not a social good.
Okay, thank you so much. If there are any other questions, please feel free to pop your hand up or drop them in the chat. I did have a question, so I'm going to jump right in. Steve, you did already mention the loophole of the... Oh, Roz is asking. So Steve, I'm just going to ask you that. What does ESG stand for?
Environmental, social, and governance criteria. So it means that you assess companies on their environmental performance, social performance, and their own governance. And it links to things like the principles of responsible investment in the UN Global Compact. And it is part of investment management industry showing that it is being responsible.
Great, thank you so much for explaining that. So as I was saying, Steve, you did mention the loophole of the TPNW not being signed by the UK as a justification that financial institutions use. But a question for both of you, maybe you can share one key argument that financial institutions use to justify their investments and a way that we can work around that, like Steve, how you mentioned calling them out on the other countries that have ratified the TPNW where these financial institutions are operating. What might be another example or two that you could share?
Oh, well, one of the things that you get very quickly from banks and pension funds when you talk about the ethics of this is they say, oh, well, we've got an ethical fund that people can opt into. So it's all covered here. But it's actually quite difficult for pension members to be able to assess ethical options because you tend to get put into a default fund by your employer. And then sometimes you get advised to seek a financial advisor before making any move, and that's just too difficult. So what we're looking for is financial institutions to set basic criteria that covers all of their funds, not just we don't let them get away with saying, well, if people want to be ethical, then we've got this little a pot of money over here which they can go to. We want them to apply ethics across all that they do, and they're sympathetic to that, and that gets you into the conversation of what is ethical. On the TPNW, the other thing that we do, and I'm sure Susi was going to mention this, and I might be stealing her thunder here, is that the way in which the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is worded is very similar to the Convention on Cluster Munitions. And financial institutions have acted on the Convention on Cluster Munitions. And although it is a treaty that governments sign on to, there's an article in there which is about governments not encouraging the production of cluster munitions. And the same wording is used within nuclear weapons. So we say to them, well, you've moved on cluster munitions, you've got the same wording here. You've got to be consistent. You've got to move now on nuclear weapons too. Now that the TPNW has entered into force as a global instrument. And we push that point.
Thank you so much, Steve. And Susi?
Yeah, just to add to that, the Chemical Weapons Convention as well. Same language on the prohibition. And the Oxford Public Law Dictionary, I think it is. I forgot right now, sorry, explains and articulates what does the prohibition on assistance with the production, development, or manufacture of the weapons mean. And in this Oxford explanation, it goes into and it talks about financial assistance is prohibited assistance. So if you're providing money to help with this, implicitly or explicitly, that is a prohibited act of assistance. So we often talk about it in that way. But I want to raise two other very brief things. One is I'm going to drop a link in the chat for you. And if you scroll down, it's a very long, this is like a page to scroll through forever. It's really long. But if you keep scrolling down, it's got some tools and how to respond to frequently heard reactions from financial institutions. Because a lot of people get them. And so we put together a list. What are some tips? And it's not the most user-friendly, sorry, but it's at least something you can take a look at it and use it for the way you want. The other thing that I talk about a lot are other principles that institutions are ascribed to. So Steve mentioned the UN Principles on Responsible Investment, which doesn't really want to talk about the weapons sector. In fact, they barely want to talk about human rights. Like they are, how do I put this gently? There are 4,000 financial institutions that move as fast as frozen molasses, right? Or treacle. That's the British, right? That's how fast they move. Frozen stuff, not good. Super slow. They're starting to talk about human rights. We talk about human rights and nuclear weapons because most of the financial institutions and a lot of investors that we've talked to subscribe to the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. And these UN guiding principles, they put burdens on investors, they put burdens on business. Like if your business violates human rights and gets busted for it, you have to pay. It's called remedy. Like you have to go in and fix the problem that you caused. And this has been huge in some, especially in the extractives industry, in mining, where we know mining industry goes in and destroys communities. You know, they incite violence and civil unrest in order to be able to suck resources out of the earth. This happens all over the world. But a lot of these mining companies are being held to account now because of the UN guiding principles on human rights. It gives a basis to do this. And if you are investing or you are aware of a business relationship that contributes to the potential violation of human rights, that is a problem, and you have to take every action within your power to prevent that problem from happening. So the guiding principles are a great tool because so many institutions have them like splashed on their website without maybe really thinking too much about what they're about. But there's also this whole UN working group around this. It's in the human rights framework. And there's a lot of flexibility within this framework to talk about this issue. There's a huge forum. Thousands of people come to Geneva. It's like, it's crazy. Like everybody's there. It feels like everybody and their mom's there to talk about business and human rights, from investors to companies to NGOs to people working in the arms sector. And the guiding principles are a really interesting way for us to advance these conversations, because the guiding principles are evolving, they're mutable, they're growing, they're under interpretation, constantly being understood in different ways. And this for us is super helpful, because otherwise we get stuck in this solid, there's the NPT, right? And then the conversation stops instead of looking at someplace that's more dynamic. So a lot of our colleagues who work on arms trade treaty issues are really putting more attention into the business and human rights context. And 3 years ago now, there was a specific attention paid within a working group on business and human rights to the arms industry. And some advice given to both the financial sector and the business sector about ways to ensure good human rights practice within the arms industry, because there are ways to do it, right? I mean, it's not impossible. We figured out how to regulate medicine around the globe. We can figure out how to regulate weapons. Like, they're a lot bigger than pills, right? So like, we need to think about that. And look at these different things in the way that we're talking about it. So I would encourage you, take a look at the resource, but also do some exploration about ways to talk about these issues that might be a little bit outside of your comfort zone, or maybe more in your comfort zone if you're more used to talking about issues around human rights. And don't forget that in 2018, the UN Human Rights Committee issued General Comment number 36 that said nuclear weapons are a risk to the human right to existence, the human right to life. And they threatened that. That's what they're here for. They're big, dumb, clumsy bombs, right? So I'm enthusiastic because there's so many ways to talk about this, and I really want everybody to do so. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for all your questions that you have shared. I am aware that I have gone slightly over time on the Q&A section, so apologies, Sarah. Before we move on to the breakout rooms, I just want to say a big thank you to Susi, who has to leave now. Thank you so much, Susi, for your time, and we really, really appreciate it. And I hope we can have you back here another time, and all the very best for all your work. Thank you so much, Susi.